Ryan, do you want to do any sort of intro, or would you like us to jump into things?
Well, the only thing we need to do is, yeah, let's go ahead and approve the minutes. I think everybody saw those from the December, January meetings. Meetings open. Any questions, concerns, issues with the minutes as written?
That's good. I sent back one concern about the wording over the bridge. And Orion has that information. Some clarification on the bridge.
All right, so you want to make a motion to accept the minutes as written?
As amended,
Yes.
so moved.
Second. All right, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? All right, that would be 7. Yeah, 7-0. All right, takes care of item 2.
Hey, Bill, my question, are we gonna post those to the town website?
Yes.
Okay, because I went there this afternoon, there's nothing other than agendas up there.
That's why we need to get these approved. These are the interviews and the voting.
Yeah,
And that
I
kind of
know,
results.
I get it.
I think at this point, Blake, it is yours, the project schedule.
Okay, great. Well, thanks all for joining. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's all right. And let me know when you can see that.
There you go.
So just one question I had was about meeting minutes from the site walk, and we had done kind of just a project kickoff back on 1:30. So I had sent these notes or meeting minutes over to Orion to distribute, and I'm sure that he could share those with the task force as well. So maybe you want to take a closer look at that, but it just accounts or recounts, I guess you would say, the events that happened on 1:30 ahead of this follow-up meeting.
And you all saw, though, got that?
Yeah,
email, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so we're good with that. Do we need to approve those because there's no voting? We just post them.
They're minutes, technically, if you want any minutes to be approved, then you vote on them, but you don't have to keep the minutes if there's not a definitive vote on it.
But if we post them, we should approve them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt. It's a fairly good historical
No,
record.
I agree. I just want to make sure that we have to approve them. So,
I believe we approved the
here's the minutes from
minutes from the site
the
walk.
kickoff, yeah.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Just on that number 7, about says DPW, I think, instead of main DOT, but we'll clarify that. It's an
Okay.
issue, but it should be clarified.
I gotcha.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? 7-0. You know, to get those posted as well.
Okay. Great. So we'll circle back to schedule. And one thought was that since, we're targeting the full community engagement event to take place on April 1st, that we could use this opportunity with the task force to preview materials that would be shared in that session. So I've put together a draft deck, and it includes the flood studies that WSP has developed and site analysis and background, because in this first community engagement session, the idea is that we would be sharing those materials. So I might just go into full screen mode so that you can see things a little bit better. For that session, there would just be brief introductions by WSP and Richardson Associates as the consultants supporting the project that the town is leading. We would give an overview of the study area, so Marine Park and Walker Park, for those who are less familiar. This image might be helpful to some because it shows a little bit more of the dimension of the harbor. And then we thought it would be helpful for folks to understand the flood concern that was the catalyst for a project like this one. And so sharing a few images from storm events, this may be very familiar to some folks, and I'm sure it is, but there may be others in the community who are less familiar with what has been experienced to date. And we thought it'd be important to start there and not assume that everyone was on the same page. And for the project schedule, I mean, we reviewed the detailed schedule that our project team has been working with. But for the public meeting, this is probably a little more granular than what folks would find useful. I mean, for the task force, for your benefit, we had worked closely with Orion on developing a project schedule based on our start date. That is anticipating the final deliverable going to the select board in July. And we'll have, incremental task force meetings along the way, and several public meetings along the way as well. And then, twice a month, we're issuing our status report update so that you all can know in real time how things are proceeding. For the public, we thought a more appropriate schedule would be one that really focuses on the public engagement piece. So this slide, could be shared in that session on April 1st, and it would say, we're really right at the beginning of the planning process, and we're welcoming everyone to the table. That, moving forward from April 1st, there are incremental task force meetings, and that folks are able to, tune into those as I understand it. And the dates that we've identified for those are 4/10 and 5/8, leading up to the next public engagement event. That's anticipated to be late May, and we'll confirm that date and make that available as soon as that is settled. And then after that would be another task force meeting on 6/12, a draft report that's issued, and then ultimately a final presentation to the select board in July. So maybe I'll just pause there and get thoughts from folks on the task force. If you feel like that's kind of the right approach, I mean, we certainly want people to understand what's up and coming so they can partake and participate. But it just seemed like the super detailed schedule might be a lot for the community at large.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I attended your presentation at Camden. And I liked the presentation, but I had a lot of trouble with the slides. There is very little contrast, and I agree with you that the timeline that we use, that's way too complicated, obviously, for the general public. But even this one, if the font could be increased in size, that would help me a great deal. I might be old, but that the stuff down at the bottom, there's just no way you could read that from the audience unless you're a teenager. So,
Okay.
it's meant as helpful criticism.
Sit up front.
And I will, and also, like, for instance, that first slide, it's a very light blue with white font on top.
Yeah.
There's no contrast there. So
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. And, one of the things with that Camden event, that we realized is that it also sort of depended on like the projection in the room and that sort of thing. So yeah, we can certainly increase font size. And I think that this schedule, because we've reduced the amount of information that's shared on the screen, it's actually going to allow us to do that more easily than the more detailed schedule.
Okay.
So yeah, sounds like that could work. Are there other comments or on schedule?
On the big screen too, as opposed to sitting on a TV screen, so that will probably help.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I
Just
points well
saying,
taken.
so.
Yeah. I guess what it does mean is that we need to make sure that it looks right when we, ahead of time, get in there a night before or whatever.
Yep, I think that's right, Phil. We could do a test run.
Yeah, since you're close, it's easy, so. The task force is gonna need to approve this draft report before it goes to the select board.
Yeah.
So I think that we should I don't know how we reflect this on the schedule. I don't even know if the public cares, but I'm just sort of letting the group know that there's gonna have to be a, you know, an approval process. Hopefully smoother than the comprehensive plan process we just went through. Sorry, that wasn't meant to be mean. It just in terms of getting that baked in somewhere, Blake.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, hugely important. We wouldn't want to issue something until that'd been vetted thoroughly through the task force. So in the more detailed schedule that we had coordinated with Orion, we have identified that the draft would be presented in June ahead of that July select board meeting. Um, you know, if the task force feels a need, you know, for there to be more time, I think that that could be discussed. Right now, what's driving that is that the second public engagement meeting is the end of May. So that gives us 1 month to then have the draft. So you would have public engagement meeting 2, end of May. You would have a task force meeting between the second public engagement session and the draft so that we can talk about how that feedback gets incorporated into the draft form. And then there's 1 month from the draft to final. So there's, you know, the schedule is quite aggressive, but it seemed like this was, I don't know, the most realistic way to divide things up.
Yeah, I think that the 4 weeks between the draft and the final, that's fine. Given, you know, the fact that we're gonna need at least a week to just to read it, and then we're gonna have to meet sometime in the middle part of July, and that's its own challenge, given the season. I don't know whether you're envisioning a select board presentation that is at a formal meeting, or if it's like a separate briefing at the library or whatever. I mean, I'm open to any of it, but
Well, the idea was, so it came from the traffic infrastructure study, you remember that one? Where
Yeah,
they presented a final, and then the committee presented their work to the select board, which kind of created a little bit of a nuance, because select board had questions that the task force couldn't answer particularly.
right.
So the idea was with this one, present the final to the select board. I don't know if we need to like bridge these meetings and it's like a duo meeting or whatever, I don't know. But the idea was to have it at a select board meeting.
Okay,
you know, the VPI one, I presented that, but I mean, it was like, 5 minutes, here it is.
Sure.
yeah. Well, I guess my issue, not so much issue, but the fact that if we have the draft at the end of June and we take 2 weeks plus to get the draft finalized through this group, so we have a report we think is good, that's probably gonna go past the July select board meeting, is my point. And, so I'm just trying to head this off at the pass before we get into May and go, how are we gonna do this? So, we don't need to solve it right now, but to me, it's a, schedule crunch that's gonna occur.
Okay.
Because this group needs to have a couple of weeks with that document, and if there are any changes, then that's gonna cause Blake to. So, I mean, I'd rather have him present his work product at the select board meeting.
Okay, good.
But I don't want it presented without this group agreeing that
Sure.
what's in there is appropriate.
Well, that makes sense.
Now, we may agree 6-4. Okay, but I'm hoping it's 10-0, but, my only point is we need to figure that out. So that may push us, and you can go through the math and figure out whether we can cram that many pounds of you-know-what into a smaller pound box, but,
I think we're gonna need to have it for 2 weeks.
I think.
We're gonna have been part of the process every step of the way, so.
All I'm saying is, let's make sure that this, because right now, he's got the final in the 4th week of July. And that's not a select board meeting.
No, that didn't.
No,
I
we
mean-
can push. We can push it to the meeting in August, because it's what, a week later? Was it?
I mean,
11th. It's the 11th of August? Okay. And I don't know if that messes up other scheduling.
Well, no, so Blake, with that, can that final presentation be to the select board in August and then that presentation in July be to this group?
Um, Yeah, I
Right.
think we could look at the August dates. I mean, I just need to make sure that that works for, WSP and others. But assuming that it does, then I don't have an issue with that. And, we do want to allow due time for the process to work.
All right, well, why don't you two noodle on whether or not that's gonna cause any other screw up? But on its face, that seems to make the most sense to me.
Sounds good. We'll look at it on our end. Any other comments on schedule before we move on to the next item?
I have a question. Can you go back to the other slide with yeah, that one. So there are a total of 3 public engagement meetings. Is that what we're looking at?
There are, and part of that is that the third one is that select board meeting, which is open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 really kind of working type of meetings. Okay, so the first one is definitely April 1st. Is that, didn't see it on the town calendar yet.
No, because there's a comment about, on the agenda on public participation
Yeah,
strategy.
that's number 7 right there.
Okay, and so is there a reason, so what's gonna determine what our late May date is? Do we have to do something before we determine what that is? I think it's gonna be really important to get those dates out to the public so that people that wanna come can get them on their calendar. I'm not sure when we can decide when that late May date is.
Yeah, I agree with being out there at the same time we announce April 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That sounds great.
Good idea.
so it looks like you're trying to keep it on Tuesdays, or I don't know if those are different. I think it'd be helpful for me, when I see 410, if I see like a day of the week with that, that's very helpful to know, when.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the only reason that we didn't conclude a specific date for the second event is that it's sometime out, and we wanted to allow the task force to have, I don't know, more of a sense of how things are developing on that 410 meeting and 5/8 meeting before, noticing the public that there would be a meeting on such and such a date. And that was just to allow folks on the task force to, have confidence that we were ready for that next public engagement meeting. We'll learn a lot in this first public engagement meeting in April. And, every community is a little different, and processes, play out in different ways. So it was just allowing us a little bit more flexibility, because what we didn't want to do is set in stone a date that we're not able to live up to, because we want the community to, be able to entrust in the process. So it's a little bit of a balance. Like I hear that we want people to be able to plan, but if it's 2 months out, that's quite a ways, and there's a lot for us to do between now and then. So, one idea would be, how do you feel about noticing that second meeting, say, a month in advance, which, is still quite a bit of notice, but by then we'll know a lot more. We'll have had another task force meeting after the first public engagement event, and it might just give us more confidence that we're hitting that target.
Other thoughts? I'm equivocal about it. I mean, I see your point, because it's a good point.
And plus for our scheduling as well, I feel like my calendar, but I hear his point as well.
Yeah.
I
Any
mean,
other-
if everyone agrees that they just want to lock it in, I can work with Orion on, a date that works for the consultant team and also is available at the Opera House. It just means that then, that's pretty fixed, and we need to, ensure that we're ready.
May,
I think that's
it's a
okay.
very small window, late May, right? It's,
Yeah, is there anything that anybody knows about that is the week of Memorial Day week? Memorial Day is the 26th of May. That's the last week of the month. Is there anything that goes on that week, like kids all disappear to go, to Hollywood or whatever? I mean,
You guys were just talking about the donut festival, is that, when's that?
that's not until June.
middle of the month.
June 13th, 14th,
Okay,
13th, 14th.
okay, we're gonna miss that.
I feel like
that we should just assume something is happening that day and not schedule it for.
Well, I don't mean Monday, I just mean that whole week.
That whole week.
Is it like kids are off school for whatever stupid
I
reason?
don't think so.
I don't think.
I don't either, but my kids are in their thirties, so I mean.
But I think, you know, that whatever, that's just a crazy time anyway for anyone in the school system.
Yes.
We know that. So it doesn't matter if it's, you know, end of May, early June, it's all gonna be crazy.
Still a mess, yeah.
Yeah. But which day of the week is the least messy for parents of school-age children?
I have no idea.
Wednesday?
Midweek,
I think there's only one here that can give an opinion.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are all sort of the easiest days in general.
They're the easiest, yeah. All right, well, why don't you two, once you get with Blake and so the 27th, 20th, 29th seem to be open concept days for us, whatever works for you all and the
Okay.
opera.
Are we thinking Tuesday? You're gonna keep to Tuesday, or did you want to switch days of the week? Is there a strategy with that, with the engaging the public? Switching those days?
I think that the variables for the public meeting are just more, you know, is the room available and does that date work for, you know, key task force members, Orion and the consultant team.
Right.
So I'm happy to coordinate that with Orion and then, yeah, you could move forward with that piece. I mean, is it helpful while we're talking about the community engagement piece to talk about, you know, the draft flyer that we had developed ahead of this April 1st session to see if that messaging is right? I mean, alternatively, we could circle back to it, but it seems like we're kind of covering it now, so we could just continue on that thread if that makes sense.
Sure.
All right. So this is a flyer that we had circulated, and I didn't catch exactly who had made the comment that it's helpful to have the day in addition to the date, but we are trying to reflect that on this draft flyer, where it says Tuesday, April 1st, 2025 at 5 p.m. at the Rockport Opera House or via Zoom, and we've added in actually since this draft the address for the Opera House just to make sure folks are aware of that. And it says that the evening will be recorded. So if folks aren't able to make that specific date, they know that they could look for that on the town's website on the project webpage. And right now, it just gives a little bit of background about the project and what to expect on April 1st. And, you know, we were thinking that this could be communicated in multiple different ways. Like, I mean, it's formatted for 8.5 by 11. So, you know, if people want to print any and post them, that's feasible. There's also the idea that we would post it to the town's website and project webpage. And Orion, I think you had said, you know, that it would be circulated on the town's social media platforms like Facebook and other platforms. Is that accurate?
Correct. And I'll second Doug's comment. Does anybody else feel like the white on that light blue is kind of a little hard to read or?
The oldest person, yes.
Yeah, is it?
Little difficult.
I mean, we can make it black or whatever color, and we can enlarge it too. Like that's at 16. We can make it, I don't know.
Yeah.
We can play around with it, but
You play around in between. You go find the oldest person in your office, Blake, and ask them how they feel about it. Won't you?
I would keep the,
Like the white town.
yeah,
You like the white?
I like the white. Yeah.
Okay, I'm.
Well, what about the background?
Well, a darker background. Darker
Okay.
background.
I will work with
Sorry, we
with
want
folks
to workshop.
at the studio and we will amp up contrast because there's no point in having a notice if people can't read the notice. But I'm hearing people are liking white as long as we get enough contrast, and we'll enlarge the font size. So yeah, happy to do that.
I'll let you work that out.
All right.
So do we want to jump to number 7 on this to talk about the strategy to get this out? Since we're kind of on this
Yeah,
piece.
let's do that.
So what are we, what's the what's the baseline version of who's gonna see this right now? I mean, we've got what, the town website, right? Are you gonna put it on Civic Ready?
Yeah, so that'd be Facebook, X now. The email blast for those that have signed up.
Okay. Because we typically see the usual suspects, right?
Yep.
And,
That's likely, I don't know, I don't know about those. And then Nancy, you've reached out about the road club. She's,
Oh, that'd be a good idea.
but
and I'll get it to the Rockport Garden Club. There's about 80 members of that. I can get that through Dan.
I'll pass it out to kind of the working waterfront.
okay,
Or the mall officer and other.
that'd be great.
Okay, so we wanna have it at the library.
Posted, yeah, right.
I'll post it on the Facebook local Camden Rockport groups that I'm.
Okay.
And I can send it to the Rockport Boat Club people.
Yeah, and I'll deal with the garden club crowd.
We could throw a ream of them off the bridge.
Okay, so that gives us, RPC, Garden Club, Facebook with Josh, the typical town stuff. You're gonna give it to the, working waterfront,
Maybe Abby can post one at the harbor master's office.
definitely.
What about the school? Is there a way to get the principals to send this out? Is that a thing?
I used to know how to do that, but not anymore.
I will add that to my list.
Schools. Maybe Carrie can help with that, I don't know, as far as knowing who to call.
Maybe Carrie, yeah, Carrie definitely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna work with,
The Midcoast Villager and.
Yeah, it's a calendar event. Right, do you submit calendar events from the town office, Orion?
Okay.
we're also gonna be having a, event from the Rockport Conservation Commission at the Opera House on that Sunday on March 30th. It's a, halcyon that Megan is putting together. It looks great, by the way. Saw a preview last night. But she's got her own channels and then we'll also advertise it at that event. Now it's obviously it's just 2 days before, but it will always be able to push that. But I'll talk to Megan because we talked yesterday at our meeting about how to get the notice for that event, which is the resilience, studies that we did of infrastructure and ecosystems and social vulnerability for climate related stuff. So the topic is basically the same thing. So I'll see what, she's come up with.
There might be some confusion, I will say, because we're using resilience in both of these
Right.
approaches, both of these projects are saying resilience and Rockport and.
Well, and they are related, right? We
Yeah.
have to make sure it's clear. I agree.
I think for a lot of people, it might get confusing.
As long as we keep saying harbor resilience, that's the key to this, to make sure the harbor is emphasized.
Yeah.
So,
When will these be available?
The flyer.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think of the contrast? I think it's working better. So if folks are good with it, like right after this meeting, I can circulate the update.
that is better, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you need the address to the Opera House on it even? That's your question. We have to kind of know
Yes.
where it is. You want it on there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll add that back. Yeah. Yeah, I'll send it tonight. That's fine.
Okay. Community. Now, we're giving a free beer at the Opera House on the 30th.
So
Can you
it's
put on their lower level, please? Because people go upstairs and shake the doorknob and wonder why we're.
No, it's the upper level.
Yeah, it is upstairs. Oh, is it?
It's
I'm
upstairs.
sorry. I
Yeah.
thought it was gonna be.
No, it's upstairs. Yeah. It's upstairs.
Excellent point.
if it's upstairs, do you want us to add that, or is that, I mean, it feels like that's kind of the natural spot to look first. So maybe they'll just find it, yeah?
So you got Jeff lined up for this?
Will refreshments be served?
Really hadn't thought about it.
They were served in Camden. It was a nice touch.
Were they,
Usually people want refreshments.
were they paper or plastic straws?
No straws. There were cookies, tea and coffee.
Camden Can was kind of the ones who had stepped up to sort of help with that. And, you know, we were trying to make it a little bit more family friendly because sometimes these events that start at 5 o'clock are difficult for folks and, you know, people need to eat. So one barrier to entry that we were trying to crack was just providing, you know, some snacks or food in case that enabled folks to make it who might not otherwise. That was kind of the background. The way it ended up playing out is, you know, we really didn't unfortunately have a wide spread of families, and I'm not sure if that's just because of the time of year of the sessions or level of interest or what. But that was sort of the background in terms of why we were trying to do that, in case that's helpful.
I'm neither here nor there. I'm perfectly fine saying if we want, I'm sure we could scam a few bucks out of the town to buy, you know, some sodas and cookies. If you want to go to that level, I'll put you in charge of it. That'd be all.
How much time do they need? How much time do they need to the presentation, and do they have adequate time?
Yeah, what are you thinking, Blake, as far as getting up front for the yap yap?
Yeah, I mean, folks have limited attention spans and time. So I want to be cognizant of that. So, you know, I guess if you look at what we had done in Camden, the presentation portion of it was say 30 minutes or 30 to 45 at the most. And then there was another, you know, 20 or 30 minutes for Q&A and input. And then we had surveys that were made available to folks so that they could provide input as time allows on their own schedules. I think that was helpful because it didn't feel like they needed to do it, you know, immediately or that would cut into the time allowed.
So we haven't really scripted out what we're going to attempt to do in this meeting. And we're beginning to, and certainly you may have your own thoughts on it, but I don't think we as a group have really thought anything about, you know, introducing it, which, you know, that should be 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at the most. Jump into the data collection that you've done so far. But since the purpose of this is to gain input from the town.
Yeah.
What format are you considering as far as, you know, 3 microphones and, you know, everybody answered these 5 questions, or what are we thinking?
I think-
Or to get people.
I'll just say, I went to that last meeting in Camden and I thought it worked well. Leaving a lot of time for questions and answers, I thought was important.
But that was content already developed, right?
Yeah.
In this case, we're at the front end of the content development, so we're not gonna be showing them a whole lot of solution-oriented stuff, I don't think. So what we're really trying to say is,
I mean, I think it's a mix. We're not showing solutions. That's totally right. But what we do want to do is make sure that we, you know, share with them why there's a project looking at flood mitigation strategies, show them the flood maps, explain them in clear language, which Todd Coffin does an awesome job at, and then allow a lot of time for Q&A. And then, you know, I think our recommendation is that we would follow that with a survey. So folks who are at that session will be, you know, invited to do a survey, just like we did with the community groups and task force. And that way we'll have, you know, a lot of information and background to inform the solution set. So that would be really valuable to our team. So, you know, I think that is actually very similar to what we did for the first session in Camden. It was a structure just like that. And we did have a lot of Q&A in that first session.
because I can imagine we'll get a lot of questions like, well, what are you gonna change down at the harbor? Or I don't wanna lose a beach, or, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's just kind of generic stuff.
Once you start a few topics, it's gonna go,
It's gonna go.
and you're gonna need a lot of time. That's my thoughts on it. So if we introduce some of the big basic things we're talking about, Dylan, I think it's gonna eat up a lot of time, honestly.
Yeah,
And just let it flow from that, as opposed to try and script it a little bit.
That's my thoughts, but
I'm neither here nor there, that's why I'm asking.
I'd like to find out, were there any surprises? I mean,
Survey?
no, when they made the presentation, was everybody, hey, wow, I didn't understand this, I didn't realize this.
Yeah.
I mean, what was the gist? I mean, everybody seemed to understand it, where we're going, why this is necessary? A lot of shaking heads or people walking out.
I think it's a lot of questions. It seemed like a lot of questions on how things were going. I mean, a lot of questions of what's, you know. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a big unknown, but it's valuable.
That's what I'm saying. It seemed like doesn't it seem like there was a lot of questions on what was happening and.
Well, that's my impression. Yeah, once it got rolling.
Yeah, I think that's once the couple things start having, people really want to chime in and add to the discussion.
But we're gonna be, so, and this is a question on a statement. Camden has a much broader set of challenges than we do. So whether it's restaurants or parks or businesses, you know, et cetera, it's all the above, and some of them are a disaster, right?
Yeah.
We're in a much different position where I'd like to see is we're planning specific solutions. We need to do X, Y, Z, and it's gonna cost about this much money. That's my goal at that third session. To be able to articulate that. Camden wasn't in a position to get that far, I don't think.
right.
Because of
Yeah, I think you're
broad-
right. You're right, Bill. That there's a, more defined or a smaller area to cover really in this study, and that should allow us to dive a little bit deeper. So for that third one, there is the funding component. I mean, one thought I've got is that the deck we have today is formatted in a way that it reflects kind of the things that we would hit on in this first public engagement session on April 1st. So I'm wondering if it makes sense for us to sort of like flip through what we've got, because I don't think we've had a chance yet to share with the task force, the flood mapping and this background info. And so if we get through that, then you all would have a pretty good sense of what we've got available for that April session. And then we could circle back to this conversation if that works for you all.
Yeah. Perfect. Have at it.
All right, great. So flood mapping. So we've got Todd Coffin on the line. Todd, do you want to sort of just tell me when you want me to go to the next slide and I'll advance things for you?
Yeah, great, Blake, thank you. Yeah, we wanted to have the community understand the origin of the 3 sea level rise scenarios that we're showing on the flood maps. And they include a 0.8 feet rise by 2030, 1.5 by 2050, and 3.9 by 2100. So what we show here is the time data, the historical time data that Maine Geological Survey and the Maine Climate Council have used to help project where we feel the sea level rise might fall. It's important to note that while 3.9 out to 2100 is an average, that really the range could be from as low as 1.6 to as high as 8.8. And the Maine Climate Council really is asking communities to commit to managing the average, the 3.9 feet by 2100, but be prepared to manage something that could be lower or something that could be significantly higher. So we feel this is an important diagram just to show that this is data-based science, but there's also a projection and an uncertainty element behind the three scenarios we're talking about.
Could I interrupt?
Yeah, back up, yeah.
That slide again, I think is a killer for the audience. I'm sorry, let me finish, Bill. I gave presentations in my previous life and I've been through death by PowerPoint. And, if you're sitting in the audience and we've seen the slide before, but they haven't, I think that's just overwhelming.
The only point was gonna make is this came straight out of the Maine Won't Wait document. this isn't their work.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I'm just saying though, you put that up in front of a bunch of lay people who haven't seen it before. It's gonna turn people off right away. First of all, once again, the font is so tiny for these 73-year-old eyes. I can't even read what the legends are and what the axes are, so that's my 2 cents worth.
Do you have I've seen this many times in the past, and you'll note that the data on it isn't even updated beyond 2010 because the upswing in this particular page was beneficial to saying things are getting worse. But if you actually take it out to 2020, 2022, that little uptick at the end goes away. And so that just from a pure technical perspective kind of drove me nuts. Is there a way to potentially reformat this into a sort of a less confusing technical piece that is updated?
Yeah, there may be some other communication tools that the Climate Council is using. We just leverage this obviously because it was pretty clear and concise to us, but you're right, if it's on a screen, it's not, high resolution and it might be at a distance, particularly if someone's sitting in the back of that audience. We agree it would be difficult to see. We'd have to rely more on our narrative to explain it versus their ability to follow, every detail. So yeah, let's take a second look at that. I'm happy to do that, work with Richardson and their team to try to strike the right balance, I think is the target.
That'd be great. And I think the technical update that the state put out last fall might extend this a little bit. And it may look a little different. I don't know, Jen, do you have any recollection of that?
I think it does, and I actually think there's a simpler graph. I'm looking for it right now.
Okay. Well, let's just leave it at that then and get it cleaned up.
I mean, if what we're trying to do is communicate the point, and the point being, this is the band that we're trying to plan for,
That does
it. The last 12 years of data, be what it may, isn't what the state's.
I agree. That's just a particular little technical thing that pisses me off, but
Given that we know where the focus is and the range, why not just a tide gauge on the corner of the harbor master's building and a photo of that? This is what this looks like in your park.
yeah. Although the concept is getting people to understand that out 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now.
Yeah, no,
It's doing this, right?
0 to 10, and the band between 1.6 and 8.8 is,
Roughly what we're aiming at. Yeah, let's just leave it at, Blake, think about how we can clean it up to make it the point without confusing the issue, that's all.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so the next series of 3 maps is depicting the 3 sea level rise scenarios that we just discussed. And what we're showing in the yellowish hash marked area is the current base flood event, which is on average the 100-year storm, but could certainly occur, a bit more frequently depending on, the storm cycle and, real-time events that affect those statistics. But we see that in the black outlined area, just a small incremental increase in landward inundation that results from this first scenario, which is adding 0.8 feet of sea level rise to the current base flood map. And we'll see in a little bit, but that the reason for that is that the topography, as you know, along the harbor shorefront is quite steep. And as a result of that, even though sea level rise may increase, it doesn't move very much inland relative to the land area that we're looking at. So the next map is just a similar illustration, but showing the 1.5 feet of sea level rise projected by 2050. And again, because of the steep topography, there's only a slight incremental increase landward of that additional flooding beyond the base flood map. And the third is the 2100 scenario, which is 3.9 feet of sea level rise. And I think the culmination of these is easier to see on what we call the composite flood map, which is combining all three scenarios onto one figure.
And is this on top of the 100-foot storm or
Yes.
separate and apart from?
Yeah, good question. The current base flood map, which was developed in 2016, is shown in the hash marked yellow area. And then the incremental increase resulting from the three sea level rise scenarios we just discussed are shown in those very thin colored bands. And I don't know if Blake, you have the ability to zoom in, but there's certainly, some approaches we could take with the public meeting if we can't zoom in and it's difficult for the audience to see, just because those bands are so narrow.
Right. So I've talked to Todd about doing an enlargement of this graphic that focuses on the project area around Marine Park and the focus area of Walker Park, so that we might be able to make these larger. I mean, one of the points, I guess, to make is that, we're not seeing a great distance, even in that time span of 2030 to 2100, just due to that steeper topography. So we've got a couple of exhibits also that show the topographic change to help explain that.
Okay.
Like an elevation view rather than a plan view? Is that what you mean by?
This is called a hill shade map. So it really is a topographic relief map where the shading on the gray color palette really shows us pretty nicely the steepness of the bluff, particularly on the northwest side of the harbor, right above the marine park, as well as to a large extent around the boat club property right to the north, and even on the southwest where the park is, the Walker Park. It's a little bit flatter, but there's still a significant rise up to C Street. And then this third illustration is really designed, if anyone's challenged by looking at plan view, this is a profile where we're looking north up the harbor, and it's showing the base flood event in the lightest blue. And in between is the 1.5 foot scenario. And then the top dark blue is the 3.9 foot. So we've identified features on the ground surface in the marine park. So to the left is Pascal Avenue and the lime kilns, which are roughly 20, 25 feet high, showing that even in the base flood event, the light blue, the bottom colored interval, it could reach the base of those lime kilns. But certainly by the time you get to 2100 and a potential 3.9 foot sea level rise, you're really creating some significant inundation at the area of those historic structures. And that's certainly a planning element that the town could consider when looking at the flood data and thinking about resilience priorities and strategies going forward. Then, of course, we've shown the Vulcan locomotive, how really, for the most part, that feature is being inundated in a flood event with wave action. Would that be secure enough? Is it protected enough? And this might help the audience understand the vulnerability of some of these artifacts, some of these structures along the shore that are important to the community. And then we see Park Drive and a slight dip in the topography. And moving to the east, the Andre the Seal statue. Of course, it's very close to the shoreline and the seawall, so it's particularly vulnerable, although you might argue it may not be a large effort to secure it with some anchoring or relocation, depending, again, how the community responds to the vulnerability of that sculpture. And then you can see in the very bottom, the white, the 5 foot mark, that is the mean high water mark. So in the absence of a storm event, that's really where the normal, highest high tide is on a daily basis. So you can really see the impact of those storms and the sea level rise combining to create quite an inundation scenario that needs to be considered.
Let me ask a question. So what we're looking at here is not just static sea level rise, but also kinetic based on the 100-year flood, right?
That's correct. In the base flood, in each of the sea level rise scenarios includes both the storm surge as well as the wave action on top of that. So those are two important components that create the predicted water level elevation we're looking at.
So people who may have been down there during the last big storms in January of last year would say, I don't know if that was a 100-year event or not. I simply don't know. They don't see this kinetic concept yet. They just see the water kind of made it up near the base of the locomotive, which is where it wants to bring the storm. Is it useful or not? And I don't know this. Is it useful or not to show just the static sea level rise? In other words, somebody might say, we'll get a storm once in a while, we'll fix it, it's no big deal. But if you look at static rise, just in and of itself, that's gonna flood the base level of the park and other areas. Is that?
That's a good point. This park area by and large is in a wave zone of 1.5 to greater than 3 feet. So it's certainly possible to show the difference. And that topic comes up a bit when we're talking to communities about breakwaters, for example, and how useful can they be in mitigating flood and storm damage. And we like to point out that, yes, a breakwater could knock down the wave height in the dynamic action of waves, but it will not totally mitigate the storm surge element. So you still get several feet of storm surge. And as we're seeing here, an additional 1.5 to 3+ feet of wave action. So either way, the combined elements are posing quite a risk to this, relatively low-lying flat area along the harbor.
I mean, what do others react to this slide? I mean, I've got my own.
I find it vastly confusing, honestly.
Oh, really?
And so I don't understand. I think you could expand the vertical axis and that would help a bit. But I don't understand why the seawall isn't more of a vertical line. And I don't understand the jump between the 5 feet to the 14 feet. I mean, I think you're saying it's the wave action plus the rise. But
yeah,
to Bill's point, if what we're looking at previously was 1.6, 3.9, and 8.8, I would expect to see mean high water plus 1 point plus those numbers, and then maybe talk about wave action on top of that. But
in other words, look at a static cross section first.
Yeah,
and then say,
I would say, why did we jump to 17 point whatever that says? I mean, I'm not saying it's not within the realm of possibility, but it's a stretch for me to go there.
In other words, look at static rise first, as predicted potentially in the 1.639, whatever it is, and then on top of that, the kinetic action of a storm plus waves.
Sure.
Are two different. Yeah, those are two different scenarios.
Yeah, and I think what's going on with this slide is that it probably scaled the vertical and the horizontal are at the same scale, but maybe that doesn't necessarily have to be to, make it a little more clear.
Yeah. What I'm asking is how does the group feel about the difference between trying to explain the difference between static rise, which is like your everyday July afternoon impact of going at high tide, holy crap, why are my ankles wet?
Two slides might be helpful.
Versus having a kinetic on top of that.
And then have a second slide with a
Overlay.
or just, it might be good, a little more clear to.
I guess if I were given it, and I'm thinking out loud, I would start with just what the static rise would look like in a cross section like this and say, okay, as it just slowly, as Antarctica and Greenland melt, this is what we're gonna see over the next 50, 70 years based on the predictions. But that's not the only story. The story is, as you all know, in the audience, when we get a storm, it gets magnified. And so when you magnify the static rise on top, this is what it looks like.
I think that's a little clearer to the layperson, I think.
Okay,
Yeah, Bill, it just clicked into my head what you're referring to about static. I was thinking initially it was the absence of the wave action during a storm. You're referring to sea level rise in the absence of a storm, right?
correct.
What that 0.8, 1.5, 3.9 looks like. Just if day to day life in the harbor without a storm. Yeah, I got you. I got you. We can do that.
Yeah, because what'll happen is people will say, well, hell, if it's gonna stay dry 90% of the time, I don't go down there in January anyway, who cares? Let's just make sure the
Mhm.
boat club doesn't get washed away and
Yeah.
blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah, in the next set of bar graphs, Bill, we do take a look at that in a slightly different way, and maybe it's more clear how those water levels play out.
Can we go back to
So,
that? I have a point I want to make.
oh, sure.
So I understand what I'm looking at, but I don't think most people will. And what I would like to see is when you hit this slide, people say, "Holy shit!" Like that is unbelievable. The harbor is going to be underwater. I would like to actually see a photo of the harbor and overlay a translucent overlay of these layers, and so people can see their harbor with the layers where they're labeled like how many feet they're seeing on top of it. Because this doesn't give you that. This is like you need to really focus to understand what you're looking at, but it should actually, I mean, that seems like that should be possible, where it's a photo that's shot in the right angle where you could overlay these that rise on top. Does that make sense?
So from what you're hearing, Todd, is the filmmaker's version, because that's what Josh does.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And from me, you're hearing the techno geek side.
Yeah, no, understood. And this was intended as a schematic, arguably, but I like the idea of a photo overlay. If we had that at our fingertips or could get it, it would not be mind-bending to meld the two. So it's visually better grounded, right, for the audience, and they could see the levels with respect to what they see. Yeah.
And if I might suggest
Go
something,
ahead, Jed.
you might
Go ahead.
just put an educational slide in here that there are many available on the internet that just describes the difference between these two, the sea level rise only and sea level rise plus storms.
Mm-hmm.
And just set the stage so that people have an understanding. There's a lot of really lovely basic description figures that you can find online that just would be one slide education about what these two differences are.
Jen, do you have any in mind that you could push off to the group? I mean, but because Josh is gonna volunteer to help make the photos look cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking right now, actually. So if I find something, I'll send it. And I put, just for the folks who are also on the call, I put the latest scientific technical report in the chat that you can grab. The latest, the newest sea level rise predictions are maybe a little bit easier to see because they're more generalized.
Okay, that's great. I mean, we were using the exhibit that Pete Slavinsky had shared just a few months ago. So if there's one that's even more recent than what Pete had, and it's more simple, then
is
that's
more
good.
complicated. This one is a simplified version of his.
Yeah.
No doubt, yeah. I have no doubt that what he shows is the most up to date. It's just he's also describing it with more complexity, I suspect.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I mean, all of these are helpful to hear. In terms of the photo overlay, I mean, we could see what photos we have and if there's a good one that might help to communicate it. What I took from that comment is to make sure that people understand the magnitude of this threat. And I think from our team's perspective, we were hoping that, between the plan view map, where you can see that the entirety of Marine Park is inundated, and these cross sections with some real world recognizable objects, say this is 2 slides and not one. Between the two, the hope was that folks might be able to start to get the message. And remember, at the beginning of this presentation, we showed today already the flooding impacts, like in real photos with no magic. It's just photos from the storm event. So, our hope was that that will start to triangulate in folks' heads. You know, we can test the photo overlay thing. The only thing I'm a little nervous about is, I mean, then we're really taking some artistic license, right? Because someone is going to be like, is that line at 17.9? And, you know, if we're just drawing over a photo, I mean, we don't have like that level of accuracy. So I just wouldn't want to like misrepresent what's happening. Whereas the plan map that you saw Todd show and this, you know, the sections that we're able to generate, those are or can be, you know, accurately done, you know. So that would be the only point I guess I would raise is I just don't want to take too much artistic license, you know, and then lose some credibility with the figures.
And I think we have the, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good going on here too as well. We just, you have to say, all right, what works? Josh, honestly, if you've got a vision of what that looks like and you have the editing software to sort of think about how maybe to do that, I'd be, you know, you could conclude and say, by the way, this is what it's gonna look like. And you show them a picture of, you know, water, you know, Andre's drinking the water, whatever. I mean, but the point being, if they may need some help, if you've got some thoughts on what that would look like.
I was just saying, if you have these two slides that you're referring to, kind of the aerial view and this like side view, can you use the same colors on both slides so that, because this pink is kind of throwing me off a little bit. I think, you know, if you go to that other one with the yellow and the green, or that yellow and green and blues, and then we go to pink and
Well, the
whatever.
pink is the ground, right? So maybe you need to say that, right, in the actual, on the drawing,
From Dune.
label it.
Maybe the pink should be green instead.
I don't know.
In other
I
words,
think it looks like a desert to me.
I think you're intersecting technical, stare at this stuff every day stuff with folks that don't. In terms of people's visual reactions to whether or not it hits home, the holy shit that, you know, Josh is referring to.
You know, that's a good point, because again, in Camden, you pop up a slide like this of Camden. And it took me time to just, you know, what street is that? Oh, that's Bayview there. Oh, you know, over there is Lyman Morse. And if you're not looking at this every day, like you say, you know, it takes people a minute to get their landmarks. And, you know, if we can point some of that out, here's the Pascal Avenue Bridge.
Yes, Blake, as Blake points out, it may be a better solution to have a set of figures that zoom in to some of those key features. So you can see the extent of inundation. We'll know the depth because we have the flood level elevation on this map. And then you could see, because of the aerial photo, the features, like we could label a lime kiln, we could label the locomotive. It would just be in plain view, which maybe people can relate to better. You know, I'm very cautious based on the comments of having any figure that lends to more confusion than clarity, right? That's certainly not our intent. And if there's a mixed response even, we would rather take a different approach that may be more direct.
So,
Yeah.
the aha moment for me is when you,
I don't actually see the one.
Go ahead, Bob.
the aha moment for me is when you showed the video. The video, everybody can look at the video and say, I recognize that the harbor is underwater. I mean, it really was very clear. It was awe-inspiring as to why we're here. And the reason is these storms are coming. We've had 3 of them in a row. And look what happened. I mean, you can see, everybody can look at that and see, that's my harbor underwater. That's my park underwater.
Right.
Okay. I
Right.
mean, it was, I think it's the thing that's gonna draw people's attention. It was so in your face. Just my comment.
We don't have any, you don't have any videos in this so far yet, right?
We don't. I mean, if folks have videos from the event, I think that could be incorporated. Right now, we've got a few representative images, you know, but open to that if there's videography of the event as well.
Got some, Blake, so I'll send you a OneDrive link so you can download it.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I mean, I think that would certainly bring it home.
Or go back to the other elevation slide for a minute,
The cross section.
cross section. Yeah, I actually, as the average Joe, I found this quite helpful. There is some confusion again about what it actually represents. But I think you're gonna tidy that up. But I hate to say it again, could you make the font larger, a little older for us
Yeah.
older people?
Yeah.
One quick comment on this, maybe draw the bulkhead in there, might make it a little clearer too.
Yep.
You mean
Agreed.
the seawall when you say bulkhead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's really a,
Yeah, the
it's a
software we
bulkhead.
use, I'm sorry, the software we use doesn't acknowledge very well vertical faces in topography. It tends to want to create a slope. And we could probably touch that up and make it look more like a vertical transition. Because this is real data, right? We're not drawing this and sketching it. It's using tools we have to plot the topography first, adding features, then adding the water levels. And, computer and software, sometimes they don't do a good job with real minutia around the landform. So that's what happened at the seawall, right? Because I agree, normally we would expect to see a vertical face there, and the software interprets it as a slope. But yeah, we could probably take a shot at touching that up.
I mean, we could definitely assist with that piece of it. And I think that would go a long way in helping people understand how this relates to what's out there. Because there's definitely no aspect of this that's like proposing the removal of that. And obviously that's important to the working waterfront. So graphically, we could work on that piece, just like we could increase text size.
We're what, 10% through the presentation?
Just about, but you all are doing your job, because my hope was that by sharing a rough draft, as rough as it may be, that it provides opportunity for us to get this right ahead of the public meeting. And we've got a few weeks. So I think the schedule that we've outlined, is workable. So this is great. So, I mean, Todd was starting to say that, in these examples, I'll let Todd talk to these.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. This next series of 4 bar charts get at some of the points that Bill and others are making around the static, in the absence of a storm condition, right? So you'll note, first of all, in blue is the mean high water, which is the daily highest tide average that's been recorded. So this occurs every day for the most part, a high tide, right? So it reflects potentially a nuisance or an operational concern over, and as Bill asked, the static conditions. So the blue is really in the absence of a storm for the present day, short term, midterm, and then ultimately the long term at 3.9 feet by 2100. And likewise, the red is the highest astronomical tide, which again roughly occurs the highest tide water level every year. So again, it's something that would be, dealt with operationally or as a nuisance, on average every year. And that level, again, is without a storm, shown from the present day through the long term. And it's the yellow or gold, however your resolution shows, that's the storm events from the base flood today, at present day, and then again, the 3 sea level rise scenarios of 0.8, 1.5, and 3.9. And then as a marker, just for perspective and context, we're showing the ground surface at the harbor master's office, which is roughly 11 feet. And Blake and his team put in a photo showing the harbor master's office, and you can see the floor level. And that allows us to look at those water levels over time and get an understanding of, well, how vulnerable is that building to these both static, either daily high tides or annual high tides versus the storms. And you can see that the harbor master's office at 11 feet is quite a bit above the daily high tide. And it's not until 2100 that it's even kind of meeting the annual highest high tide, the once per year non-storm event. But then you layer on the storms from the present day through 2100, that's when you see that inundation build up. And those are generally short-term events, but still a structure has to be prepared to withstand those events. So it does raise, a concern around how resilient is that structure? Does it need to be weatherized further, secured further, further hardened into the future? So,
I'm wondering, does this strike people as not, in other words, right now, the difference between medium, high water at 4.9, the blue on the far left, and the ground surface, or is that the foundation surface of the building?
Foundation floor or something like that.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble believing that it's at high water, it's currently 6 feet lower. Mentally, it's just not computing for me.
yeah, I see the person for scale helps a bit. I guess that dark ring on the stone is probably in that zone. And then measuring upward from that midpoint, maybe a little above midpoint on that exposed seawall, up to the floor of the building. That's really what's in that, 5-foot range. Yeah, that's the trouble. Like to Blake's point, you show imagery, then you get critique like, that doesn't make sense, right?
Right here. Yeah, so if we're at high tide here now, is it the difference between here and here?
No,
That's why I'm having the trouble, because it seems like it's closer now than what that graph is depicting. Feet? Is it at high tide? Is it 6 feet lower? It's not, it's just a couple of feet.
Depends on the tide, but
I think you're looking at high tide a little bit higher than it actually is with your hand.
I mean, that's
Like,
where,
I think you're high tide here on your average tide is more in this range.
right, okay.
And then, so you're looking at, right now.
So where's the?
And the ground floor, I'm assuming that dotted line is the ground floor of the office. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's it. I think that's the two already. Okay. Level, that's how I interpret it, but.
Because we definitely saw wave action on the backside of this building hitting here.
yeah, but that's.
Yeah, but
we're talking.
That's at 12.
Talking
That's
about
at
an
12.
average high tide, no.
Oh, but that's the storm right there,
Mhm.
this guy.
Yeah, I mean, again, for the public, all of these could be labeled. I mean, I don't remember what BFE means, and HAT could be,
High astronomical.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I guess my point is, the depiction is correct. I understand we got static versus wave levels. I'm just having a brain cramp over, because this tells me that at Abby's office, the storm only nicked us by a foot. And I think it was higher than that already.
Well, nicked by a foot, that was a lot of water.
I was standing back there watching it hit the wall. I've got video of, of it crashing quite a bit higher than that already. So, again, I don't want to knit the gnat in terms of the technical stuff if we're just basically trying to convey a message.
Right. What's the difference between that storm and 1% BFE? Like, I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples here.
Yeah, that storm could have been, again, we'd have to look at the science, right? But it could have been a 10 to 20-year storm instead of the 100-year event. And Maine Geological Survey points out that there's only about a 1 to 2 foot difference between a 10-year storm and a 100-year storm. It's not that dramatic, even though it's 10 times less frequently occurring, or 10 times less frequently. So, and if the waves are kind of wind driven and blown, it may make it more dramatic than the actual sort of base flood that's being predicted. And I would say that FEMA's flood mapping is at micro scale. It's designed for broad harbors and planning around, insurance issues and risk. And you could do an independent analysis of the base flood at this particular spot and come up with a different outcome. We're relying on existing information. We're not doing site-specific modeling to hone in on the exact, bathymetry and structures that are at this particular building. We're relying on FEMA's flood mapping. and trying to interpret in a practical way that helps you plan at a higher level. And yes, it could be 1 or 2 foot difference between what you observed and what's shown on a FEMA map. I think that's understood.
Yeah, I'm with you. I guess if I'm the public, I look at this and I go, let's see, the ground surface is the gray dash. And we're not gonna have seawater static above the grass for at least the next 80 years or 75 years. So all I really have to do is worry about the occasional storm.
Mhm.
I'm just
That's a good
planning
thing.
in my head.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I believe it. That's the point.
Can you Photoshop that picture to lower the building so Bill
Is happy. All right, I'll shut up. And then if you go to the other side of Manly Lobster, they've got water seeping onto the pavement, even just at high tide already.
At some times, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not every-
we'll take a look at that bar chart in a little bit, and you can beat it up, Bill, okay?
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so the next one is the
Can we go back
Marine
to,
Park. Okay, go
sorry,
ahead.
can we go back to that previous photo? Is it possible for your team so to my earlier point about photoshopping stuff, in this room, we were all trying to figure out that photo on the left, how that interacts with the graph. Is it possible for your team to take that photo or a similar one and put that graphical information overlaid on the photo? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the request. I mean, certainly, it would take not long for us to, put a blue wash on something. I think the trick for us is that with that photo, there's no datum for us to use as a clear reference line. Like we don't have a 3D model of the project area, like a digital model where I can, pull like a plane to elevation 7.2 and know exactly where that fits. So if we were to draw over the photo, it would be a wild guess. And I'm hesitant to do that because, it wouldn't be based in fact. And it's not that the limitation is our graphic skill. It's that the limitation is we don't have an accurate enough like digital model, which is the tool I would use if I were actually going to do that. So yeah, I think we'll just have to explain that like the photo is showing the present day, and folks might have to, and the gray line is indicating an elevation that you see in the photo. That's this building's finished floor. And so the other increments that are being shown are projections in the future. And, folks will have to, I think, just imagine what that would be. I can think a little bit more about it after this call today to see if there's another way to get around it. But I'm just hesitant to show something that isn't based in reality, because I'm worried that could be misleading.
One of the videos I'm gonna send you will show a wave washing onto the backside of that office that you could even maybe shoot as a picture and throw it in there. But you'll see visually how that may look without having to doctor it up.
Okay. Yeah, and we're happy to do that easily. I mean, the good news for you all is there's about like 6 of these. So this is the next spot. Todd, did you want to cover this one?
Yeah, I do. The benchmark in this series of bar charts is 6 feet, which is sort of an average of the seawall height. It does fluctuate a bit from, a little under 6 feet to 7 plus. So I don't want to, imply that it is a perfectly level structure. But again, it's just used as a schematic for the audience's appreciation of the levels relative to the seawall. So we have a much closer benchmark to the daily high tide, as well as being exceeded by the highest astronomical or annual tide, even at the present day, which is consistent with, Bill, one of your earlier comments. And then, of course, substantial inundation for each of the flood scenarios over that average seawall height. So it's certainly a lot more.
I'd start with that one.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells everything we want to talk about. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting to note too, the nuance in the FEMA mapping that at the harbor master's office, the base flood elevation is 12. If you move just into the marine park north of that office, beyond the parking area, it jumps up to 14. And again, the real world doesn't work that way. You don't cross a line and it goes from 12 to 14, right? But that's how FEMA is able to use their broader area-wide modeling to show what they believe and what they've interpreted based on data is a higher storm elevation when you move northward into the park. And that's in part because as waves are coming north up the harbor and they hit the seawall in the area of the boat club, they're being reflected. So there's almost like a combined uh, accentuating effect of the two wave actions, waves coming up the harbor, waves being reflected, and the resulting waves are higher. So there's a congestion element at the north end of the harbor, there's reflected waves, and therefore there's a 2-foot difference in the flood zone.
Yeah.
Yeah, we refer to this area as the landing off Main Street, but we wanted to ask this team if there's a more locally recognized way to refer to the area at mainly Lobster, where there's a crane, there's a dock. It looks like a pretty significant, important area of infrastructure, but we want to make sure we get it right in terms of how we refer to it.
We call it mainly Lobster?
Yeah, well, we
Let's say
call it.
commercial fishing. I mean, people may not even know.
Commercial fishing dock?
Yeah, I would say something in that commercial fishing area.
Landing, commercial fishing landing area.
Yeah, commercial
Commercial
fishing.
fishing landing, yeah.
That's probably there to people.
Commercial landing, yeah. So it has a concrete pad and of course the dock, and we see again, not unlike the seawall at the marine park, where even in the present day we have a highest annual or astronomical tide at or exceeding the seawall height average of around 7 feet, and even projecting out to 2100. Even the daily high tide is well over that seawall. So I think that gets to Bill's point around, the significance of even the static in day-to-day operations and managing around nuisance tides. It really will be restrictive unless something is done, assuming again that those projections hold true into the future. And then again, substantial, 10-foot plus inundation out at 2100, and even today, 7 feet in a 100-year storm event. So, things like the lobster shacks, the diesel tank, the related, storage of materials, those are really at risk with, up to 7 feet plus of inundation in a storm event. Things will move, things will be swept away if they're not anchored, if they're not taken care of. And that's the planning element that we feel is important, that we're happy to help the community navigate.
I mean, from a community perspective, maybe what this series would help illustrate too, right, Todd and folks, is that it's not the same everywhere. It's not, sea level rise is not this thing that impacts everything in the same way. And so the hope by just showing sort of a variety of conditions around the harbor is that folks can start to see how that plays out.
Yeah, in the last slide is kind of the middle ground of what we saw from the harbor masters to just looking at the landing, where the elevation of the boat club is a bit higher. It's the ground surface or first floor is around 9 feet. So it is staying above the daily high tide, above the annual high tide, right until the projections at 2100 of 3.9 feet increase in sea level rise. Yet still a substantial amount of inundation happens or is projected to happen even in the present day storm event, and certainly building out through 2100. So no surprise, right, that this building, was damaged in that January 24th series of storms, pair of storms, and repairs were needed to the building. Not surprising.
And then we hopped over to Walker Park, and there was a similar study there.
Yeah, not unlike the harbor master's office area where there's a seawall height of around 7 feet. And meeting that annual highest tide, even in the present day, and certainly substantial inundation right along the lane that's hugging the shoreline out at 2100 with 3.9 feet of sea level rise. Understanding, of course, that the park is a bit less vulnerable just because of the lack of really critical infrastructure, such as utilities and public service buildings and critical services. It is a recreational area, so there is some opportunity to be a little bit more reactive depending on the community's priorities and how they view the risk to the park and the loss of recreational space.
How does the group feel about, so we saw a 3 time series, right? We saw Abby's office, the mid Andre the Seal, let's call it, and the boat club and the fishing dock, all with slightly different things, right, based on their elevations and such. And then we saw Walker Park. Is it important that folks get the fact that it's not the same everywhere, or is it just as important for this first meeting to say, here's what's gonna happen in general, and pick the Andre the Seal area that says it's gonna be above our current level? In other words, from a planning perspective, when you're gonna design stuff, you're gonna wanna know what the differences are based on where you are. But it's important for this first meeting to know that it's different depending on where you are, or just the concept that in 2100, it's gonna look like this, 2050, blah, 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 blah. And just pick one of those to say, here's what's happening to the ground surface. And we can show them all, don't get me wrong, I'm just asking.
Yeah, maybe we could go into more detail in the first one, explaining, about the terms and what they show, and just move more quickly through the other 3, just showing that there is variety, but not really drilling into each one as we did, this evening in great detail.
People start to glaze over after a little bit.
That's what,
Yeah.
I personally would start with the one near Andre, because that's the one that's the main park area, and it does show that we're already kind of in the fix, as opposed to Abby's office, which says, it's only storms. So I'd start with the first.
Does the Andre area include the boat launch? Cause that's a big one
In
too.
effect, yeah, I mean, it's that area.
The seawall, the second seawall.
It was the second slide, right?
Yeah, it was the second one. That's one I said I'd start with personally.
I agree.
Stay with that one too.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Can I ask
It'd be
a
nice to
question?
stick your head on.
I see, because it's, no.
Are you
Go
gonna
ahead.
talk at all about how storms are expected to change moving forward? Because there's a bit of information about that in the technical report that, if people are writing off like, oh, well, we just have to worry about storms. Well, storms are expected to become more intense over time. And so that's also a ramping effect.
Yeah, I think that'd be an easy comment to make and to build into one or more of these slides. I agree in terms of the frequency and intensity. It's hand in hand, right? So we do talk a lot about intensity resulting in these dramatic storm events combined with sea level rise, but also, we don't necessarily show at this point a change in frequency. And if there's a graphic that helps the audience digest that in a clear way, we'd be receptive, certainly.
I know that the group wants to, or voice interest in including Walker Park. But again, I can tell you the Parks Committee doesn't feel particularly adamant that it needs to be in this whole report, because for all the reasons you said, there's no critical infrastructure there. There'll probably be some erosion anyhow, but it was rapidly fixed. So if it would help simplify things and focus more on the inner harbor, I'm sure the Parks Committee would be fine with that.
And I'm fine just leaving this in as a, here's, and by the way, here's Walker Park next.
And the last one.
Yeah, click through it quickly and don't belabor. Yeah.
Okay.
It makes sense to us.
Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful, and it's really valuable to have fresh eyes looking at it. I would also say that this is definitely work in progress, and it's so great to have that input. So we will work on those updates ahead of that session. We were also thinking that in this first meeting, we could point out to folks that, part of this process is looking at the data and mapping, but part of the process is also just engaging with the community and like getting boots on the ground, no matter what the temperature is. So wanted to highlight that there are some awesome folks from the task force who met us out there in the middle of winter to check this place out. And Abby, I mean, I guess she's not on the line today, but she was just invaluable in terms of giving us real world background along with some other folks in that walk where we, really did look at every, inch of the project area. And, because I'm in the area and whatnot, I, of course, was out there before it was buried in snow. So if folks are wondering if we have any idea what really goes on there the rest of the year, then I want to reassure folks that, in fact, we do, and have a lot of respect for what this means to the community. And that, there are attributes to these places that we're looking into, and those include things like water access and activity, history and legacy, the working waterfront, ecology and exploration, and there are timescales as well. So sure, there might be things that happen on a daily routine, but then what we also learned as part of this walking the site and listening is that there are really important special events as well. So things like the fireworks in the winter and the donut festival and, even weddings and different celebrations. So I had a call with Peter Ralston earlier today, and he said he would be happy to actually share some of his photography of the Inner Harbor and things. So by April 1st, you'll see a little bit more of that incorporated in the presentation. It's awesome that we've got folks like him locally. I've also just been doing some due diligence on, what does it look like when Marine Park starts to host an event. So this is a diagram from the Donut Festival that shows how these spaces are used currently. And I think when we think about, adaptation measures or future planning, it's important to consider both the day-to-day activity on the harbor and special events. For the day-to-day activity, we're hoping to have a diagram that we're working with Abby on that would talk a little bit about how harbor operations work today. So, talking about all of these different components, including, the very important boat ramp and, how folks are accessing the water and how that relates to parking, access, and drop off. All of that stuff that I'm sure you all know inside out if you're someone who's operating in and around the harbor. But for the community, it might be helpful just to have a snapshot of that because they may not be as familiar as some of you who know it inside out. And then after that, we are aware, that there have been some other studies. So we might just let people know that that background information has been transmitted. And, this project is not one that's starting from scratch, but began with looking into what others had already been thinking about, and the hope is that that can be folded into the planning process. So I know I'm going through that fairly quickly, but I don't know, the second part of the presentation would be a little bit more about other attributes of the sites. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the community survey. So thank you to those of you who have participated in the survey. I just pulled up the results that we've had thus far. So, one of the things we're trying to do that's a little different than the Camden approach is get input earlier on in the process. And so we were made aware that there are several different committees and commissions that, interface with the project area. So that includes the Harbor Committee, the Conservation Commission, Parks and Beautification Committee, should say. And we also know that the Harbor Task Force, obviously, is also looking at that area. So we had put together a survey and issued that, and I'm sure you're aware of that because it was also then distributed to the task force. So Ryan had said, in addition to these committees, like, should we send it to the task force? And I was like, why not? be great to get more input. Let's do it. So the responses we've gotten so far are from 16 folks, and it's fairly equally distributed so far from Harbor Committee, Conservation Commission, Parks and Beautification, and I assume these ones that say none of the above are from the task force, because that's who we added into the mix. The first question was, are you aware that flooding has already impacted Rockport Harbor during storm events? And everyone, all 16, have said, yes, they are. So that's, I guess, helpful that everyone at least understands the threat today to some degree. What aspects of Rockport's harbor do you most value? And of the responses so far, public access to the water is the one that has been identified as probably the top priority. And then in a three-way tie is the working waterfront, recreation, parks and open space. And after that is ecology, rich sense of history, livability, and other. And the other was relative lack of development. So it doesn't look as built up, I think they are saying, as Camden. And then next question was, what potential flood impacts concern you most? And impacts to infrastructure was one, impacts to public parks, ecological degradation, public safety, negative impacts to businesses, impacts to the boat club, and so on and so forth. And then at the end, we just had a blank to see if folks could provide other guidance to the team early on. And so there were all sorts of comments here that people, had invested time in giving us more input on that wasn't just a simple yes, no answer. And we wanted to make sure people could, convey what they were thinking relative to the project area. So, I mean, I, for one, found that pretty interesting. And I was wondering, if it wouldn't make sense as part of this, first full public engagement event on April 1st to extend, this survey to the community at large. And it might just be interesting to see how that compares. I mean, we had started with this subset just because we assumed there was likely a little bit more familiarity with the project area. But it would be great to understand, how the community at large would prioritize things, and maybe it'll be similar to what we've heard thus far. But if it's, different or weighted differently, then that's something that this group and the design or the consultant team could factor in as we move ahead. So that was just sort of, one idea I wanted to bounce off this group is if you all, agree and think that would be valuable, or if there are specific questions, that we haven't asked that you think we should consider, then, we could do that as well. If it's determined that reaching out to the community at large is a good idea.
And you're talking about doing that before the April 1 event?
My thinking was that for the community at large, it's probably beneficial to go through the presentation on April 1st. And that way people can either, attend that session or watch it or look at the exhibits after, they've been shared publicly as a reference. And that way they can, probably make more informed decisions on how their responses work. That was our thinking, is that it might be, rather than asking people what their priorities are without having the benefit of that background.
Thoughts from the group?
Well, just kind of on a side note, I was wondering about submitting the survey to the membership of the Rockport Boat Club ahead of the April 1 engagement.
But is that gonna skew to their, hopes and dreams versus sending it to all the fishermen? Or, it's a question, I'd say.
Yeah.
In other words,
I mean, you'll get 185 people saying protecting the boat club's the most important.
Well, I mean,
but I think that
they
is.
are stakeholders.
Agreed. But my question is if we, and that's the reason I asked whether we're gonna do it before or after, because I don't want to skew results. I mean, I think what we did with parks, the Conservation Commission and Harbor is a representative, cross section of kind of the community as a whole. Well, maybe that's a little arrogant, but I don't think there's It's not, doesn't skew one way.
What about the board? What about RBC board and committee chairs or something like that?
Yeah, but I would say that then we need to do the same thing for the fishermen. Same thing for the business owners. I'm
No.
I'm not worried about it from ultimately when we have a big bucket of data, let's say, April 20th or whatever. But I am more concerned about it on April 1st if we put a big survey that's been skewed in terms of its population and the response we would expect to get. So I 100% agree that everybody at the boat club should vote on this. John?
They can control, they can monitor the groups and they can isolate them. So you can get all this data, for the boat club just by itself. So if you want to see any bias, you can clearly see it that way.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the bias in the end. I'm worried about the bias that goes on the screen on April 1st. That's it. That's all I'm concerned
Is
with.
this going up on April 1st, this
Yeah,
survey?
we're gonna show
Oh,
these results. Right, Blake? I mean, you're gonna show some,
I think we could talk about that. I mean, initially, Bill, I thought we would, but now that I've seen the results and sort of heard this conversation, I wonder if we want to do that. It might be the kind of thing where we can say on April 1st, we did a preliminary survey with the committees that are active in the project area to test, the survey and get some preliminary results. But really, after getting those, it was apparent that we weren't capturing a wide enough demographic. And so today we want to, open that up to everyone so that the responses we get reflect the full, interest level of the community. And maybe we do, say it like that. And then people will understand kind of how this process has unfolded. I mean, I think that would be fine. And then we could share, what the results of the public at large are in that second community meeting before sharing, draft alternatives, and people could then closely correlate like, oh, I get it. Like they're looking into this, option because that was strongly represented in the feedback and we could tie the two together.
Like, I think that sounds like a great idea. And it also means that everyone at the meeting will leave with a base of knowledge of where we're at. And then we put it out and get as much feedback from everyone, from every club and stakeholder.
more informed. Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like it is helpful to show the preliminary results from just a handful of
I don't think it is.
Committees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This doesn't-
No, I think
These
that,
before I took the survey, it just kind of mean, oh, so
Yeah.
those people, it's gonna maybe skew my response
Right.
to see these preliminary results.
And we don't.
I think.
Agree. So do we want to show the questions? I mean, in other words,
No,
you're
I
gonna get a
think-
survey? So
I
let's
think-
just leave them.
I
Tell them
think-
you're gonna get a survey.
I mean, I would think we would just tell folks at the meeting, and we're opening the survey up to everyone because, we understand that that's what's needed in order to get a more accurate picture, of what the priorities are. I guess my question to this group would be, what sort of time window do you think is reasonable to ask for responses within? I mean, what we saw with past surveys is that a lot of people either do it, soon after they're invited, or they don't do it at all. Like it's uncommon to see someone take the survey like 3 weeks later. And I would expect that would be the case here. For our, consultant team, it's also kind of helpful to set a deadline of when we know we're going to, aggregate the data, because then we can just say, all right, well, these are the responses we're able to fold into this process. And it doesn't slow the process down. So I was sort of thinking, maybe 2 weeks, something like that as a window for input, but curious to get your thoughts on that.
2 weeks is fine.
Number I had in mind.
Yeah, and that gives us time to ping certain groups to say, by the way, did you?
Yeah.
tentatively.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 2 weeks is fine.
Sounds good.
One question about the deadline, is there any other event happening around this event in which we could advertise this survey being available? Like a town event, I guess I maybe at Orin for that.
So when's that Halcyon thing?
The Halcyon thing is the 30th of March, so it's 2 days before. So cause I don't wanna, I'm happy to say something about it, but I don't want people to start.
Yeah,
I'd rather have them be informed.
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
So are we going to not have any of this survey on the presentation? Is that what we've decided?
Yeah, not the results, just the fact that it exists.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I won't need to make my further comments about the slides.
I think they already know what the comments are gonna be, so.
Question about the presentation. Is this gonna be this is a Orion Bill, right?
Yeah, upstairs is a projector.
Okay, and on a really big, massive screen. Okay.
That we'll test 2 days ahead of time to make sure the resolution's right and all that stuff.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about material being presented? I just wonder if we have no measure of how unique some of the attributes are in Rockport. Like, for example, that the bulkhead right up to the water where commercial fishing and recreational folks can load stuff onto boats with barges and with cranes. Like, that's a rather unique element to our harbor that is not found commonly in the mid-coast area. I don't know how to define exactly like what my scale would be like, or in the surrounding 25, 50 miles, like there's not, these things are very uncommon. And so I just bring that up because wouldn't it be wise to know what is unique about that place that we would especially want to consider preserving?
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I agree
Yeah,
too.
Yeah, I could jump in real quickly, at least qualitatively. Our firm supported DMR in a 10 working waterfront study along Penobscot Bay. And I'd want to be careful how I said this, but Rockport has one of the most unique diversity along its waterfront in terms of, the statue, the locomotive, the kilns, the harbor master's office, and yet there's a strong working waterfront element around the public fishing landing, the boat launch, the 2 cranes we observed, the storage space along the town property to the north that, boats and other equipment is stored. I think we can say that and emphasize it without offending anyone, but just acknowledging that this harbor is unique and we have a broad, experience base to say that. And yeah, Blake, your slides really hit that home quite nicely.
I didn't say those words during that.
But
those slides.
Abby might have some data on how many boatyards are actually using, I see when at the spring and the fall, we all see a parade of recreational boats. From how far away are they coming to actually launch in Rockport? I think it's a quite valuable resource in that sense. So she might have some data on that.
Yeah, if there's some statistics around visits or boat traffic and use, I think that could be put out there right up front, right? Just sort of cementing the importance of what we're doing on a multitude of levels in terms of culture, in terms of recreation, in terms of the working waterfront. Yeah, if there's anything like that, we'd be happy to capitalize on it and work it into the discussion. It doesn't take long to really flash it up there and make the point and really drive it home.
I mean, yeah, no, absolutely agree. I was just going to go back to this plan. And, I guess one of the things we were hoping to get, as I said, but I said it pretty quickly, was, this sort of diagram that we're hoping to work with Abby on that would show like how these different frontages operate, just because folks may not be as familiar with that. And maybe that's a tool that would, be a graphic on the screen that if there was some data about like, Abby is able to see that there are folks from, 6 counties that are, folks who are coming in and out of here, or whatever data we could get, that might be an opportunity to highlight that piece of it also. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like that is very important. Like, what is unique about this spot? And therefore, when you think about making it resilient, how is that playing out to ensure that, you know, the unique qualities of that place are able to function into the future?
And is it something you could ping this group on, like, give me your top three, why this is unique things to you, and then you can send it to.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you feel free to send me whatever use you got. Right now, he's working with Abby right now to ping all that and then we'll
Yeah.
continue building to it, but
Right,
yeah.
okay. So anybody that wants to contribute to that, including you, Jen, just shoot it to Ryan and that'll get it flagged.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a big enough question that we should think about, you know, adding that into the survey? I mean, it could be something that we ask everyone, you know, what do you think is unique about Rockport? The study area here, just
Sure.
throwing it out there.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that's a fine question to ask, but I also think that most people who use it recreationally probably don't understand the value of the parking lot and the bulkhead for commercial purposes that is rather unique in the area. So like,
Yeah.
you know, there's more recreational users than, you know, just pure number, but value wise, it might be just as important, like economically, that's all.
I see what you're saying, totally. Yeah. And so if we get a survey result back that's like, you know, what's most unique is you have a seal. You know, you're like, well, I don't know that that definitely means that that's like our top priority from a resilience standpoint. And, you know, what is the contribution that the thing, you know, is making back to the community at large? So,
I would assume that Abby has some of this data because if you're
yeah,
gonna park something, if you're gonna take a lot of the space of the bulkhead, you have to talk to Abby about that. So like I would assume that she would have that
yeah.
kind of data. So
Yeah, no, she seemed like she was willing to help us out. So, you know, let me keep in touch with her on that front. But I think the points you're raising are really valid and really key considerations for any strategy that would develop. So, yeah, I'll work with Abby on that one. I mean, that was sort of the content that we had. The only other slide that I thought we might share with folks would be one about, you know, how moving forward, there are other communities like this one who are looking into similar challenges. And, you know, at the beginning of this process, we would look at a wide array of potential measures rather than making assumptions that, you know, we know the answer right away. So one thought was that in this first community meeting, we could at least daylight to folks that there are lots of different types of strategies. It's not just, you know, one type, and that what we would be bringing back in the, you know, next meeting is trying to correlate some of these strategies with the project area based on the priorities that are identified through the survey. And then we just sort of open it up to Q&A after that is the plan.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Some of those images that you had in your presentation to us, some of your projects, specific projects that you've done, I think are helpful.
Some case studies. Yeah. Okay.
Picture kind of thing.
Yeah, pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. And the hope is that people, you know, I guess that's a good point. We don't want people to leave being like, oh no, there's no hope. We want people to be thinking about, you know, the fact that there could be some measures that bring some positive elements to the community. So hopefully that happens. I know in terms of time, we're already at 7. So we're about an hour over. But are there other comments or questions, or, you know, do folks know how to get in touch with us if there are things that occur to you after today's session?
Bob?
One thing you might want to touch on is, okay, when you're done with the study, what are you gonna do next? What's next? What does the town plan to do after this? You have funding set aside? Are you planning to move forward with it? What's the goal? Is this a multi-year project? Is this a study we're gonna look at in 2035?
Is that
What,
something?
what
we-
does
we
it-
present?
yeah, what does the town want to do? What does the town anticipate doing going forward? What's the action item after this?
Yeah, I think it's a legit point to
Yeah.
look at the program in general, yeah. Like, we're looking to build this, and we have to figure out the deliverable that they're coming up with are alternatives, estimate the probable cost, and kind of a staging thing, that's where we're leading to,
And the citizen engagement is critical.
and this is phase one right now. Yeah, no, we'll put that in the front end.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, by incorporating that in this meeting, people know, I guess, what level of information to provide, because it's not that we're doing, final design for construction. We're trying to do higher level planning, and daylight some opportunities to be proactive instead of just reacting to all these storm events. So what do you think that needs to be added in?
Okay. Anything else? Anything else from you guys, Blake?
I mean, I would also just say, and what are you planning to do? There are some potential funding opportunities that are
Yeah.
coming down the line that we are aware of, so, because a lot of people are probably going to think right now there's no money, and there is
How much-
possibility for money.
What are our taxes gonna do on that whole?
We're gonna talk about that in a minute. So we're talking.
All right,
Sounds good.
I think, the Richardson team can head off. We're gonna have a couple other discussions, Jen, if you wanna hang on.
All
I
right.
appreciate it. Thank you, Blake and Todd
Yeah.
and everybody.
Thank you, Blake.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks
have a
all.
good night, all. Appreciate your hospitality.
Thank
Alright,
you, well,
see ya.
done. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you.
Good night. Yep.
Floor is yours.
Oh, I just wanted to mention something. It has nothing to do with this committee, but since I got the esteemed A team here. I attend the school board meetings. I don't have a child in school, but it's 70% of our tax dollars goes there. And I'm the only person from 5 towns that goes. There's not one person from any of the 5 towns that attend, except for me last year. And we're gonna have a minimum, this is now flash figures, which means it's in advance. At least, let me get the number, a 6% increase on the school taxes alone, $1.5 million more next year than this year. Numbers haven't cascaded down yet. But and we're the lowest impacted community out of the 5. This is a big deal. For some reason, I don't know why, but the 5 towns doesn't look at this. I don't know why that is.
Well, I can give you one reason, talking to 4 people who were very much involved in going to school board meetings, probably 10 years ago, maybe longer, and how poorly they were treated at those meetings by the board.
No,
And those people, forget it. We're just, we're not doing that. And, I might go, but when you hear something like that, it's like, yeah, not gonna do it. So that'll answer one of your questions.
okay. That I haven't witnessed yet.
Well, I think you're with
Stay around for a while. Right.
I mean, this is gonna be a huge impact. Plus, you're gonna have another tax increase, right? That's coming up because of
Because of which one,
well, everybody got their home inspected, so that's gonna have an impact.
the revale.
That's next week. I'm planning on burning mine down the night before. So.
Hey, Jen, you mentioned something about some other funding sources.
Yeah, well, the state, this is all pending various things, but the state is still trying to figure out how they're going to allocate some NOAA money. And, I'm just going to assume right now that NOAA, that money is still available. It could change.
Probably have.
Can I ask a frank question about the 2 million we were verbally promised to
I do
do?
not have any confirmation on that right now.
Okay,
I have a contract, that's all I have. I don't have a notice that we lost it either, so.
Yeah.
What about if
I
we're paying
don't
you?
have any reason to think that money's in jeopardy right now.
There was a grant I was applying for that was FEMA and they've not been responsive as of late.
It's
Says
just
it's reimbursement.
a reimbursement, how money that we're gonna pay. So it would be sort of a change to the,
Right, I was trying to get a grant to offset the cost of this that we already had the money
Yeah.
for. But that was through FEMA, that was the only item that
yes,
we were eligible for.
Orin, did we get FEMA money right after the storm?
That was another item that we're working on, the name of which I've forgotten. They've kind of promised to put it back as is, and anyway, the public works director was talking about doing some digging, and I said, you're gonna do digging like here pretty soon, and so we're about to do this plan, and we don't need to have the park all ripped up while we're doing this plan. So, yes, there was some money promised. The hope is that money, whatever that amount was allocated for, would kind of go towards the project whenever we're done with the plan, so. But I don't,
yeah, John was talking about that. I got a call into him, he had called me back,
yeah,
so.
so,
They were
Well,
trying to settle with us,
I
they
will
were trying to
say that-
settle with us, Jen.
I'm sorry?
FEMA was trying to settle with us,
Yep.
and they asked us for a macro cost estimate of, how much this was gonna be, and they were gonna say, okay, here's your money. But it was done in a vacuum, we really didn't know how much they were talking, and we didn't know how much to ask for. And this was as of 6 weeks ago.
Yep.
And I don't know where it sits right now.
Well, Senator Collins is offering support for FEMA funds, but I think mostly that's for towns that got FEMA money that are looking for reimbursement, and that's not us. We weren't that far down the path.
yeah, I don't think so.
Okay.
Anything else?
So I have a video as well.
Okay.
That I can share, so it's a big file, can I put it in our OneDrive? And then get it to
Yeah.
Richardson somehow, I don't know how, do they have access to OneDrive?
No, but I can get them a link for like a temporary.
I would rather just upload it there.
Yeah.
instead of-
You're gonna put it on the SharePoint?
On SharePoint,
Yeah.
yeah.
And if
And I
Peter
wonder-
Robinson is sharing photos, he was out there during the storm as well, so he got great photos.
I went down on the second storm and shot video. So it looks more professional with my big camera. I'll cut together something, because I cut together a video of Rockport and Camden. But I'll dig through what I shot of just Rockport and cut something together, and
That'd be great.
maybe, they could show that, and then
Yeah.
that would have a bigger impact.
I think that'd be perfect, because mine's just this.
Yeah, mine-
I got down as low as I could. So I could be there. Abby actually scolded me. She was like, I can't let you be that close to the water. I'll get in trouble. Like, okay.
One quick thing on, before we kick off, I went to the meeting in Camden, and, I'll say I was a little unimpressed with their proposals as far as the working waterfront aspect of it. They basically took it all away in Camden. There's one little circular thing where that's the access for the fishermen, for the schooners, for the day sailors. And I'm looking at it, I don't see, they essentially eliminated all the lay down area and all the parking and all that stuff. So I'm a little concerned about, and I don't know what Camden was asking for. I didn't know what, I'm just a little concerned of what they're gonna propose here, and I wanna make sure we're on the same page on giving them, feedback early.
Good.
Here,
No, I-
here, I underline that.
Yeah.
Like plus
Yeah.
one, I think working waterfront is being lost and we need to protect it.
I had the impression that that group was gonna be circulating more among the stakeholders before the public engagement, actually. From their proposal here. From here? Okay. Yeah, from here or for Camden? Yeah, for Rockport. Okay.
the sense I got from their proposal that they gave us, I thought, oh, these guys are gonna, circulate among the harbor, as they make a plan. And maybe they intend to do that after April 1st or between now and April 1st, but, I thought, oh, this guy's right in Camden, he'll be right out there talking to everybody right off the bat, but I don't think that's
It
happening.
didn't seem like, or I don't know who they're talking to if they were,
Yeah.
Camden's a little more difficult than there. We're lucky here, it's a little more defined, fewer stakeholders,
It's-
easier to fix what's here. I think we just wanna concentrate and make sure we're not trying to do some changes here. And like Jen was saying, it's a really unique harbor, not a lot of places you can do what we do here, and, I think we need to protect it.
Well, it's our group is responsible for shaping that, so I appreciate you bringing it up, because that will be important, John.
You know, the survey process that they're doing, we've just seen the problem with it. When we brought up the boat club, if we bring in the boat club and we have 100 and, it would swing the results way over here. Because it's voluntary participation and there's no, I mean, I've done a lot of surveys in business for many years and, there's a way to do it to get reliable data. You're not gonna get reliable data. You're gonna get interesting data, but you're not gonna get, really good, I don't think.
Yeah.
Hard and fast.
You'll get data, about what people who fill out surveys think.
Yes.
Yes. And so I.
Not the working waterfront, like you're not gonna get fishermen to serve, you gotta go talk to them.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going with it is, there should be a long list of, they should go talk to all these stakeholders, and you guys as a group could put together a good representative list of here's 6 fishermen you should talk to. Here's 6,
I'll work on it.
private recreational boaters you should talk to. Here's 6,
And if it's not gonna be diverse and representative, it shouldn't be used as data to be input into what we're doing.
I think the working waterfront piece that you're talking about, that's the most critical thing that we make sure, because there's gonna be enough vocal for probably the rest of it, but if you wanna put together a group of people that said, are you willing to talk to this guy for an hour or whatever, we can certainly make that happen. No question.
I mean, just from my own personal experience, I did some research on behalf of the town of Camden for the pro snowball. And I did 35 individual interviews at least one time, 35 individuals at least once in compiling some data for, a report for them. So, that's the only way you're gonna get the really good information, I think. So I like this group because I feel like going around the room, you got kind of you already have a representative from most of the stakeholders that you're gonna want in the room.
All right, so how do we go about getting input from people? What like logistically, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna have these guys interview them? Is that where we want their time to go? Is that,
Yeah, I don't know that they have the time for that. I'm thinking out loud, but we need to make sure that the underrepresented groups, which we're currently sort of loosely focusing as the working waterfront, get their representation. This group as a whole needs to make sure that's held up, so.
and you can push to get, I'll get this many people together, and then still other results, then you're getting results from people you're pushing to get, surveys down on.
But it's our job as a team,
To get a representative.
yes, it is.
Right. Yep.
And to call bullshit when we need to call it.
How are we feeling about their preparation for the April 1st meeting?
That's a good start.
It was kind of lame.
And they got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping they're I'm hoping they're kind of waiting for that meeting to have something to sink their teeth into. And I think that first meeting is gonna be really important to get, the information we want them to get, cause it's early on. Like that, the second meeting, they're gonna be so far along, it's gonna be hard to change things as much. I think it's important to get as many people to that meeting, the first one. Cause like in Camden, when they did that, you could see they're so far along in their planning and the
Yeah.
stuff they presented is like,
Well, they gave them A or B.
Yeah.
That's your choice. Kind of what
Yeah.
my takeaway.
With tweaks, but right, like the
Yeah.
broad strokes.
Yeah,
it can be.
I think that we have the ability to do, while we are, the scope of work states we do more here than they did in Camden. There are different
Camden had no
RFPs.
committee.
Because the Camden had to be way too general. We can be more specific, and I think that, you know, as having been in their shoes for a number of decades, they're just starting to work on this now. Don't you think?
I agree. They'll only be at the 2 or 3% level.
Yeah, they got 3 weeks yet, and
After that,
forever.
it's gonna take a while to develop this, to include, make sure everything is included in the quote design moving forward. This is kind of like, what do you have?
Yeah,
And what can we? from
but we need to see a draft of this, Ryan. We'll talk a little bit. We need to see this get crafted. It can't be sprung on us based on these comments, because I agree, it's real rough right now.
And I don't know if it's, makes me more or less comfortable, but I mean, what we've said going into this and what the various committees have said is, you know, look, we like what we do with the harbor. We don't really want to change what we're doing with the harbor and what it is a balance of a lot of things. So, okay, we're gonna talk to all those people and they're gonna say that they like their segment of it. And then we're gonna say, yeah, like we said, we wanna keep the balance that we have and just.
And it seems to me like everyone likes the balance right now.
Yeah.
It seems like there's no stakeholders that are really pushing for more than they have.
It's the number one comment that I've gotten so far from everybody. Keep the balance is there, but protect it.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's make sure that happens.
That's our great.
Good. So, I mean, the part that I'm like a little uncomfortable about that is, okay, we're gonna get this public input. And it's not really gonna affect we don't think, our trajectory here.
Yeah, I mean, but
But isn't the rub gonna come when we decide what sea level rise to go for and we're losing ground in different proportions across the park, you know, across that region, that's when, like, it's not impacting all the uses evenly, right? We like the mixed use, but it's not gonna impact all those uses equally. It's actually gonna hit the parking lot, the commercial waterfront, that side of the harbor faster first, right? I think that's the rub part.
Yep.
Right, the hard questions are coming. We don't
Yeah.
see them yet.
we'll get there.
But the right people are at the table. All the stakeholders are at the table, which is a big thing.
Yeah, we just gotta make sure we protect the whole thing.
So are you envisioning they send a draft, be circulated to the task force?
We gotta figure that out, because we can't let them just walk away and then come back in 3 weeks with a presentation and go, wow, that's what we decided. At the same time, we can't get 10 people's input to their presentation every third day, otherwise they lose their mind.
Right.
So somewhere along the lines, we gotta find a balance.
Yeah.
And, we just gotta talk to Blake first and say, all right, what's a reasonable way for us to keep our eyes to this?
So it's April 2nd.
First.
April 1st.
April Fool's Day.
5 o'clock.
So that's 3, 2, 2. Do we need to meet and do anything before that? Are we happy to make that the time that we? Question, I don't know.
I'm okay not meeting, but that's me.
But yeah, so if there's a draft, we circulate that among this group.
I would
Definitely, yeah.
We can do that. And the other
we
thing,
can make a decision too, if there's a lot of, it's gonna probably be pretty close to the meeting, probably before we get a draft out of that.
I would guess, but the other thing we haven't talked about is how we're crafting the entire meeting, because these guys are a piece of it. They're not, I mean, we as a task force are really driving this process. So we need to figure out what role we're gonna play and how we're gonna do it in terms of the introductions and sort of orchestrating what's gonna happen. It doesn't have to be a big material timepiece to it, but it does need to, come from us.
I have a great idea. What if we open the meeting with photos and videos of those storms? Just remind everyone why we're here. Just open it with that. Boom, like it's just like the destruction that we all witnessed And then everyone like, oh my God, I forgot it was that bad. Because it really kind of, it was like, what, 2 years ago?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, we talked about why we formed the task force and then.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I guess I'm gonna be the turd in the punch bowl, which I frequently am. But, you know, looking at the Camden presentation, I was very underwhelmed with that. Largely with their graphics and their slides, and I'm seeing the same thing here. Now, I did just go see my eye doctor, and my vision is okay. But, you know, when you're sitting in the room and there's this tiny little font, you know, this stuff is gonna go over 90% of the heads of people that are sitting there. You know, they're gonna say, well, wait a minute, what is, you know, what is that?
Remember, it's gonna be a massive projecting screen,
Yeah,
right? So the font
that stuff, yeah,
should be
just hear me out. It was shitty. And sitting here tonight, I had the same impression. You know, the colors were terrible, the font size was terrible, and it's highly technical, you know, high astronomical tides. And again, you're presenting this to, you know, the moms with their kids in the audience, or the, you know, the old guy who's just been in town forever. And so my point here ties into what you said, that if they're gonna present all of that highfalutin stuff, you ought to start off with pictures, because everybody understands pictures. And, you know, I think that would be the best part of the presentation that I've seen thus far, so.
And we're gonna start with that. So we're just getting.
I'm willing to take everyone's photos and videos and put together something.
That'd be great.
That could be awesome, yeah.
That'd be really generous. That'd be awesome.
Okay,
Yeah.
so just put it on to OneDrive and I'll download it.
Holy shit, is that our harbor?
Yeah,
Yeah.
John?
Good idea.
Bill, to your point, I mean, I would say, and your point, Doug, why doesn't the committee make the presentation of what they had there? I mean, get them to redo those slides so that they're, you know, more digestible for everybody, and then have the people in this room actually, you know, present it. I didn't see them adding a lot of value to it. You know, they had the information there, but, you know, you could present it, Bill, in a more conversational and down to earth way, probably.
And we have to be careful because we are attempting to find the neutral parties to do this as opposed to,
Okay,
you know,
so
so
maybe that's the reason.
Let's you and I talk about that.
Right, neutral parties to do it.
Well, in other words, if I get up there, everybody's gonna think, oh shit, he wanted to build a sewer plant. So I'm making an over point to make the point, but
Yeah.
the point being is that they're a neutral third party that is supposedly the expert, but at the same time, we need to shade it,
No, you're right.
and it's gotta be
You're right.
there.
Ignore everything I just said.
An introduction might be good,
Right.
you know,
It's a good one.
introduction from the committee, and I'm not for those, and I do it. And then the committee, you know.
I agree 100%. I will admit, I haven't given 5 minutes to what this night's supposed to look like until now. So, now we need to figure that out. Jan?
Well, can I ask a question? If, just thinking about taking advantage of maybe some synergy with the climate action group, because they've been doing, education at the library, and there was actually a sea level rise, presentation a little while ago.
Yeah, I gave it. I gave it.
Right, but then didn't Peter Skovinski come to Rockport? Am I not remembering that right? I go to a lot of these meetings. I don't know if there's any opportunity to.
There is. We have another speaker series talk a week from yesterday. Next week at the library and we talked about it at the last one, or I did, frankly, and I'll do it again next week.
I just wonder if there's an opportunity to increase awareness and understanding about sea level rise and storms. Susie Arnold at the Island Institute, who was on the technical committee for the climate plan, does a great presentation.
Yeah, I think we can build in what, and you had made the same point earlier, Bob, where getting the videos out front, that was the pictures were 1,000 words. Josh is willing to put it together. I think it's all good. We'll figure that out, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah, we have to give the presentation, but it's the town's hired consultant, it's the independent that's looking at this.
Yes.
So will we be like all on stage, like the task force?
You can.
Yeah, we all wear green t-shirts. Okay. I think we do need to point out who everybody is and it does need to be hyper formal. So.
And especially who they represent, because you really represent the key stakeholders are on this group, and that's so important.
Yeah, this group is you.
We may want to consider
I
wearing
think
name
name
tags.
tags
too.
are appropriate.
Agreed.
And it could even, say who you identify with, water.
A handout at the door.
Who we are. Yeah,
They can
I'll
see
admit, like I
with name
said,
tags and understand,
Is
our
it,
town is doing.
is it possible to get a printout of the slides for people that can't read the screens, that maybe they have a printout
Yes,
to look at? Is
Yes.
that too much paper?
yes.
just, get a 3 or 4 slides per page kind of thing. and
I just assumed it would be available on the town website.
No,
by
it will be.
email or
I'll print a number of them. and bring them to them.
People want to refer to it while they're being spoken to, maybe ask questions from them.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for reading.
But just while I have you, I will be there on the 1st.
Okay,
You will? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.